the IDF has released there may be, a further operation in the north into the south of Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah are many, many times more powerful than Hamas. And in this area specifically, they will have a lot of weapon systems that are not available to Hamas. So if we see something here, it will not be a good comparison to what we've seen in Gaza. It will be a much, much hotter war, probably a much longer. There's more numbers, more weapons, and there is a risk, of course, of it breaking out in other allies of Hezbollah. We could have a wider conflict in the Middle East if that were to then happen.
Avi Mini for Rebel News, back here in Israel, this time on the north with an old friend who also is back in this region to cover what's going on. Matt, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Just by luck, we're both here.
Firstly, compared to October 7 to now, how do you feel?
Yeah, look, a lot has changed in Israel. It feels like the trauma is slightly lifting since October the 7th. So I went back down into Sderot, right down on that corner of Gaza the other day, and it's really lively again. It was very surprising from when you and I were there compared to now. There's some more T-walls, some barriers up as well to stop any incoming, because there still is incoming there. There's still alarms every day, but people are back, shops are open. It feels like there's a level of recovery from that, although there's still a large military presence in a lot of areas. But now a lot of eyes are turning up here, which is where we are in the north of Israel, of course, looking over Lebanon.
What would you describe what you do?
Look, it's a bit hard what I do, I guess, to describe it in one word. I think the easiest is probably reporter journalism, but I'm completely independent. I don't work for anyone. I can basically say however I feel. I don't have anyone over the top of me. So I've been traveling around the world, and Israel is one of these areas, to report on how I see it. I'm not Jewish, I'm not Muslim, I'm from Australia. So I came here with an idea of right, I just want to see exactly what's going on, how I feel about this, where I have criticisms as well on both parts of this, and have a look, and using my military background experience, looking at how the military operation is going, and then maybe the futures of this, and of course, could there be then wider conflict in an area like this? When
you talk about your military experience, for people who don't know who you are, what is that experience?
So it is limited to a degree. So I spent about 6.5 to 7 years in the Australian infantry, deployed to Afghanistan on FPE 7, which was a tour, as an infantry crew commander of an armoured vehicle. And then, of course, I've spent many months, 7-8 months in Ukraine as well, not in the military, outside working like this. And I keep up to date with some elements of military bits and pieces.
I guess conflict zones are not something new to you. You've got a fair bit of experience in them now, whether it's in infantry or as a reporter. Early days, I remember we had conversations when there was probably a lot of confusion around about what's actually going to play out. Even we were questioning whether they were even going to go into Gaza. We were here so early, we didn't even know. People were saying yes. I actually bet you that they were going in. There was a point where you were backed off.
I was backed off, that I was unsure if the IDF would actually roll into Gaza.
But one of the things you told me at the time, I remember when we were discussing whether they were actually going to go in, it was whether the toll, how high the toll was going to be for Israel. Yeah. And I remember you thought it was going to be massive. Yeah. Now, 8 months later, how do you think they've gone in the 8 months there?
Now, I expected a lot higher IDF casualties, into the thousands, due to, I think, the less bombing. I thought there'd be less of a bombing campaign, more of an on-the-ground campaign, and clearing tunnels, clearing areas on the foot to try and reduce civcas. Now, we have seen, of course, massive bombing artillery campaign go on with Gaza. This is why we have seen large civcas. This is why I've seen absolute devastation of the Gaza Strip, as well as for infrastructure. That you see photographs now, you can't tell where the area actually was. And of course, that is remnants of then a bombing campaign rather than an infantry campaign. Now, it's easier said than done. Now, Israel will be looking and going, but if we do that infantry campaign, okay, some of the infrastructure may stay there, but we're going to lose 2, 3, 4 times as many guys. And a good way to look at this is have a look at sort of the casualties that Russia took in an area like Bakhmut. They took 20, 30,000 deaths in Bakhmut on an infantry operation in a built-up area. Now, of course, these are very different militaries fighting, incredibly different, and incredibly different area and different capabilities. But it gives you an idea of clearing foot an urban centre is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And what you need to, on a military aspect, is you need to lean into where you have an advantage and where your enemy has a disadvantage. Now, Hamas has, of course, incredibly limited access to air defence weapon systems, such as man-portable air defence. Although they still do have some, there are popping flares and there are Apaches that are definitely within the threat of something like that happening. But then you need to lean into that and, well, this is safe here, as well as, say, night operations, because, of course, the IDF has a lot of night fighting capability and thermal, where Hamas is very limited. So you need to lean into that. I think they've leaned into, well, our aircraft are basically safe in the air, but if you are gone an M4, an Israeli through a door, and a Hamas fighter with an AK, it's first one on the trigger. Now, no amount of training can guarantee that you will then be successful in that compared to an F-35 dropping a 1,000-pound bomb on a building. Now, I'm not saying it is then the most ethical or moral way to go about it. I think if I was the overall strategic commander, I may have looked at things differently, although I don't have all the information available to me. But that is why we have seen what we are seeing.
All right, you're back. Yeah. You were here with me in the beginning, and now, why are you back?
Look, I'm back because the IDF has released there may be, a further operation in the north into the south of Lebanon. Now, what people, I think, need to understand, I get a lot of questions on this, which is right here, is the invasion is across the Lebanon border. It's not against the Lebanese military. It's against Hezbollah. It's against an incredibly powerful arm of Iran, a proxy of Iran, fighting here. That's what people need to understand. This isn't an invasion against Lebanon. It's the same as, say, when we went to Afghanistan, it was not an invasion against Afghan and its people, although, their people, of course, suffered from this. I'll never downplay that, but it was an invasion against the extremists working there. And, of course, on the other side here, you have Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah are many, many times more powerful than Hamas. And in this area specifically, they will have a lot of weapon systems that are not available to Hamas, as well as a lot of allies that Hamas may have politically, but won't step into the war then for them, as we have not seen. Hezbollah is very different. We could have a wider conflict in the Middle East if that were to then happen, being that Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, where Hamas is more of a contractor for Hezbollah and Iran. It's sort of another step out, and many, many more times powerful, and in a very, very different environment. Gaza is basically flat urban terrain. Here is incredibly hilly, incredibly tunnelled, and of course a much, much, much larger area. This will be many times harder operation for the IDF, and that's why, again, when I first came, I thought, we're going to see an operation. If we do, I think it will still be limited. How successful will it be? Well, Gaza people thought it was going to be a few weeks, and we're now 7-8 months. It will be a very, very difficult operation here. And those advantages that the IDF had in Gaza, say armoured assets, tanks driving through, you don't have that in super mountainous terrain like this. It becomes very, very difficult, more of a foot operation in here, and will take away from some of those military advantages that Israel does have. So if we see something here, it will not be a good comparison to what we've seen in Gaza. It will be a much, much hotter war, probably a much longer. There's more numbers, more weapons, and there is a risk, of course, of it breaking out in allies of Hezbollah, then firing in much greater weapons, where Hamas is building weapons out of water pipes and machining rifles on a lathe. That's not happening here. The weapon systems across here will be significantly better, like the wire-guided munitions we see in here, and this is the biggest danger in here. The IDF can jam and hit any sort of missile coming across drone with a fairly high success rate. A wire-guided missile cannot be jammed. It tows a wire behind it. Cornets, these are all Soviet or Russian stuff. And there's a huge risk of that here, and there's not much can be done. And you see the mountainous terrain, those wire-guided, they have to about 8 kilometres, maybe a bit less, of range. And this is the biggest danger here, is you can drive up this hill and go down, but these hills in the distance, some of them, when you start driving down this road, are less than 8 Ks. Now, no one's going to hit me in my blue Suzuki Swift. But you're thinking, well, if someone's sitting there with a wire-guided with 8 Ks of range, they could hit that, and you will have that in this terrain like that, and it's going to be much, much more difficult.
When did you get here?
About a week ago today, so I think it was the 4th of July.
And what have you seen since being here from this point?
Yeah, so I've been at this point a little bit. We've had, of course, an amount of drones come in. We had a missile attack just before, the majority of which have all been intercepted. We have had reports of some wired guided. Yeah, we had some of that coming straight over the top of us, especially on the drones. We've had reports of wire guided. Of course, you won't see those, and if you do see it, you're probably way too close. Down in Metula especially, there's a lot of areas that are red zones specifically for that, burnt out cars and wherever else. It's been a lot more quiet than I thought, but I guess like Gaza, if we do see an operation across, we will see a few week massive bombing campaign to try and soften elements before ground elements were to move in.
How long are you planning on staying?
Well, maybe give it another week. I'm completely independent. I work for myself. I'm self-funded, so I do need to be wary of, you know, my cost expenditures and income of how I do this. But it will depend. If things kick off, the main reason I'm here is if it was to kick off with an enemy like this, then of course the airports would almost definitely then close, and it may be impossible to get into Israel. So getting out would be possible through maybe Cyprus on a ferry, but I wanted to be here if it did happen. The longer I'm here, the less I'm sort of thinking it may, but I'm still unsure.
Where can people find your reporting?
So best is probably on YouTube. It's at Willie OAM. I'm an Order of Australia medalist or Queen's Order of Australia medalist. So all my stuff is there. I do live streams, I do Q&As, and I do a lot of updates, specifically like military analysis, mostly of Ukraine, but a bit of Israel as well.
Well, thanks for your service, firstly in Australia, and stay safe.
Cheers, you too.
If you think it's important for the world to see and hear from those that have been here on the front line from the very beginning, make sure to like, comment, most importantly, share it far and wide, because just like us, Willie is an independent journalist that you won't see on CNN or Fox News. So it's up to you guys to spread the truth. In fact, go to thetruthaboutthewar.com, see all our reporting from here in Israel about this conflict, thetruthaboutthewar.com.